Ladies and gents, this is Lucy Carlyle. She's a listener. Mother says she's gifted, but we'll be the judge of that.
Hello, I'm Lizzie, aka Shirako Orion on AO3 and Tumblr.
I'm Meg, aka Menina123 on AO3, and then Menina89 on Tumblr.
I'm Natasha, or Hell Qiqi on AO3 and Tumblr.
And I'm Mairead. I'm Savoir Faire on AO3 and Woman in Winter on Tumblr because I hate consistency.
And we want to welcome you to the first official episode of Haunting the Narrative.
We're very excited to be here.
So excited to be here.
I'm here under protest. They kidnapped me. This is a cry for help.
Whether we're held hostage or not, we are actually here to invade your ears for the better part of an hour. Hopefully half an hour, but we don't really do timekeeping here. What could we possibly talk about for our first episode but Lucy?
Yay!
So, when we first meet Lucy, it's a November afternoon. She's 14 or 15 years old. She's been an agent for 6 or 7 years. She's fully qualified and has been working at Lockwood & Co. in London for 6 months. Personally speaking, she's professional but impulsive, cautious but reactive, and in her own words, not especially clever with a rapier. As a person and a character, she's about as complex as you can be, but her perspective is the window through which we experience the books. So, if we really want to understand more about this series, we've got to start with Lucy. And if we're starting with Lucy, we need to, first of all, talk about what her background's like before we meet her.
Yeah, so we don't get a ton of information about Lucy's childhood, but here's what we do know. So first off, she's the youngest child of 7, all girls. And it seems like no one paid much attention to her growing up because there's a lot going on in her family. And her family is very working class. She talks about her father was a drunk. He passed away when she was 5. And then her mother was very busy, just trying to make ends meet and take care of her sisters. So Lucy seems like she didn't really register much of anyone's attention until she became an agent, which that happened when she was 8. And that's all she's really known since. She is by far the most talented member of her family. So when she becomes an agent, it's her way to finally feel like she's important and valued because she's contributing to the family livelihood. She grows up in a very small town in the north of England. And before she comes to London, she's really lived a relatively insular life. She's never traveled far from home. She's never really interacted with people who aren't from her area. So she is coming to London is really her breaking out of all of that for the first time in her life.
Yeah, and in both the show and the book, the event that causes her to leave her little hometown and go to London is the Whitburn Mill. And she's the sole survivor from her team from that case. Now, in the show, this case is shown in great detail, and we see how strongly it affects her. But interestingly, in the book, she says very little about it. So I pulled this quote that I think really encapsulates kind of her feelings about her early life, or at least what she tells us about it. In truth, however, I didn't spend much time at home. My sisters had all left, except for Mary, who was working at the local supermarket, and I never had much to say to my mother. So I spent my waking hours, which were generally nocturnal, with the other younger agents of Jacob's company. I was close to them. We worked together. We had fun. We saved each other's lives a bit. Their names, if you're interested, were Paul, Nori, Julie, Steph, and Alfie Joe. They're all dead now.
That's just always struck me as like nuts because she names these people and then goes, but they're dead, and never talks about them ever again.
Yeah, and I think especially if you're first reading this and you don't really know this character yet, you might think it's being very flippant, that like she doesn't care or she's incredibly jaded. And I don't actually think this is true. I actually think she's very affected by it, but she's not willing to tell us about it. She's not ready to tell us about it. She's not good at expressing her own emotions. Most of the time when we're trying to infer Lucy's emotions, we are inferring them from what she's telling us. She's not telling us directly that she's scared or happy or sad or that she misses them. She doesn't say these things. And you can really see, I don't want to get too technical here because I think we'll have a future episode on narrative styles, but just the cadence of it and how clipped she becomes when she's telling us this.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's very much like old gentlemen talking about the war in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
a bit of defensiveness in there as well. Like if you're interested, it's kind of, it's a little bit hostile. It's not expecting the reader to be on her side. It's not expecting the reader to think that what she thinks is important is important. So there's so much of her character just layered into that one little quote.
I do think maybe she's also had experience with people dismissing her feelings for a long time, and she's a good little agent. She's been trained to repress her emotions, so that all makes sense.
What does she say to Holly at Aikmers? To Holly at Aikmers, she says, "Well, you're an agent. These kind of things happen."
Yeah.
Right. She looks down on Holly for Holly not dismissing her own feelings, basically.
I don't think
Like
she
the
looks down on her for that. It's just like, okay, well, thank you very much for telling me, but what do you want me to say about it? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that happens when you're doing our job. And also, to be honest, I mean, Aikmers was not the place for Holly to be telling her all that info.
Yeah, she might have had a better reaction if it had been in a different setting. Like it is key that she's very distracted when Holly tells her this. But
Yeah.
But also, she's been trained out of talking about
exactly.
her own feelings, so it's very surprising to her when someone else just comes right out and says it. But I think that this reticence to discuss her own feelings is one of Lucy's key traits, and I think it's one of the things that makes her feel like a real person telling us this story, rather than just. It's one of the things that makes her feel like a real person talking to us and telling us her story.
Right.
Mm. Yeah, she doesn't feel like she's just some kind of narrative device or, she doesn't feel like she's actually like, I want to say the words proper narrator, even though proper isn't the word I'm looking for. She doesn't feel like somebody standing off to the side, presenting the story as it's going
Distant,
on.
like
Yeah,
objective.
she feels almost like she's talking to her diary or something like that.
It does feel very like a journal. Yeah.
Mm.
or like almost like you're sitting down with her and like having a cup of tea with like if you'd like to hear more or like if you want to hear a story, I've got a few. It's very not quite conversational, but very much feels like she's talking to you.
Yeah, I love how it addresses the reader directly, actually. That's one of my favorite things. But we're now getting into the narrative devices
That's
thing
fine. That's fine. That's fine.
which we're going to discuss. Yeah, we're going to discuss later in a later episode, because you could do a whole episode very easily on Lucy's narrative voice and Stroud's choices around, yeah, the narrative framing. Anyway, going back to Lucy herself.
Anyway, so the way that she kind of tells us this, even though it feels like, like you said, we're sitting down having a cup of tea with her, she's also very much not telling us a lot, isn't she? Like Lizzie, how you said, she just sort of like mentions, she lists off the names, they're all dead now. That's it. And she doesn't tell you how much that affects her.
Mm.
But when you read it carefully, you can see that. And the entire text, like all 5 books, are littered with this. There's a lot of Lucy that she just doesn't say.
You have to infer.
Exactly, you have to infer it. And I don't like, what of that have you ever picked up?
Oh, so many things. I mean, I think one thing that is very like at the start of the books, one thing that's striking is that she's still quite a child, even though she's trying very hard to project adulthood, or maybe not even trying to project it, but strongly believes in herself as someone who's grown up and capable and responsible. Um, but she's very much a child in some ways. We see that in how badly she wants to belong to someone, belong to a group. It's really important to her. And she also wants greatness in the way that, like, someone who's kind of too young to really be as jaded as they pretend to be.
She kind of likes the idea of the skull making her famous, doesn't she?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of. She loves the idea of being, and this is a book, Lucy, Show Lucy Difference. She actually quite fancies the fame. She likes the idea of being well known. Um, but I mean, there are ways in which she is very adult and probably more adult than me. She goes out and faces like death every single night, and she's very proud of it. She's very matter of fact
I
about it.
don't
It's her
think she
job.
really like acknowledges that she's facing death every night though. But then I think like if you're doing a job like that, you can't.
Mm. Yeah,
It's like how nurses all develop like this black, dark humor, isn't it? Because it's the only way you can kind of get through your job.
mm. Yeah,
Right. If you thought about it too much, you would never do it. So you just have to keep
exactly. Yeah.
moving.
So she's very matter of fact about it. Exactly. And I mean, she does acknowledge that sometimes you actually get scared. Like, she has like that moment, I think, when they're going into Coombe Carey, when she does kind of feel just how evil the house is, and she does have that moment of, "Ooh, not sure I want to do this." So,
You know what I've noticed in her thing a lot? When she's talking about when she's narrating cases and things like that, she often says like She just describes what happens. And then, like, almost as an aside, it's like, I screamed, or I shrieked, or I let out a high-pitched noise. And then she just continues on the narration. And
Yeah.
you almost gloss over it, or I find like my eyes kind of skip over it, and then I think, wait, and you go back and you realize that she's painted this picture of herself being super cool and hyper competent, but then you see how many times she's actually screamed during the process, and you think, oh wait.
I mean, I would like to think of myself as hyper cool and competent in my job, but I definitely scream like 7 or 8 times a day, and all that's just emails, you know?
I do want to come back to Coombe Carey though, because I actually think that's really thematic. Because that book in particular is dealing with her confidence and her like confidence in her own abilities and her own talent. And she hesitates going into Coombe Carey Hall, which is the place where she really learns to trust her talent.
True.
Because up to that point, she's kind of lost her confidence, and she gets it back in Coombe Carey. So I really like that moment from the books.
Yeah. No, it's a great, like, yeah, it is, like, I mean, all the books, like, it's a coming of age narrative, and Coombe Carey in particular is kind of that first step from essentially babyhood to yeah, kind of being like, oh, actually we are good. I think that's the realization that all three of them kind of have in Coombe Carey, is that we can stop playing around. This is the kids' game is over, you know, we are actually that good. And she makes that acknowledgement later in Lavender Lodge, like, yeah, we were actually the best in this moment. But I think Coombe Carey is where it starts. And I think that's why if you're looking at this from what's the word, a Watsonian perspective, if you're imagining that Lucy is choosing to tell the story and how she tells it, then you can see this is why she would pick, of all her experiences, she would pick Coombe Carey to start with, and other plot reasons as well, anyway. But I mean, there's other, like, there's loads of other, like, traits about Lucy which I think are really interesting that maybe, you know, you might kind of flit by if you weren't looking. Like, I mean, a constant thing in her narration is how artistic she is. She has this really, like, dramatic and gothic way of describing things, like, very visually, but it's not really cinematic. It's more like a painting to me, the way she describes things. Like, she's some super memorable images, like again in the Screaming Staircase, like the bit of plaster that peels off the wall like a piece of crumbed ham. Like, talk about, like, images that make me want to lose my lunch. But yeah.
The bloody footprints from the Hollow Boy is one that's stuck in my mind forever.
Oh, really? That's funny. I don't remember that. Like, I mean, obviously I remember the bloody footprints, but the image not so clearly. I'll have to go back. The sky, like, streaked bacon. That's very memorable. All her food imagery
Yes.
is horrible.
Delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah, it all sounds really bad to eat.
But I mean, it's interesting that Stroud chose to write her like this, as someone who thinks in such striking images, because he also writes her as an artist. It doesn't come up much, like, but she is supposed to be someone who likes to draw in her free time, and I think we can see that she definitely appreciates beauty where she sees it, but it's like it's a bit limited, or it is at the start of her arc. And I think this is
Sometimes incredibly judgmental.
incredibly very much a hater. Like, we joke about it, but at the same time, it is part of the journey that she goes on, that she's quite bitter at the start. And it goes back to this whole thing of, you know, she's had this horrible experience, which she doesn't really, and it's such clever writing, she doesn't go into a whole lot of detail about the horrible experience, but you see in her attitudes and her perceptions of the world that she's hurt. She's really, really hurt, actually. And she's a cynic. She's inclined to believe the worst in people, but I think it's a defense, because she has this soft underbelly and this tenderness for people, for children, for kind of the defenseless and the weak. And I think it's very notable that from the beginning, what draws her out of that, like, kind of dark image she has of herself on the world is Lockwood. We're not on the Carlyle episode yet, so we won't discuss it too much.
That's coming.
It is. Oh, it's absolutely, like, one episode. No, there's going to be a series, man. Anyway, it is very hard to discuss Lucy without discussing Lockwood, because he's such a fundamental part of her journey and why she becomes the person she does. But anyway, yeah, that's for a later episode.
Lockwood's a fun thing to mention though, because I've always kind of had issue with Lucy constantly describing Lockwood as reckless, and that's one of my biggest problems with the show, is that they leaned into that But in the books, he doesn't really act reckless. But I always think Lucy acts really reckless. Like, even at the very, very beginning of the books, when she's still, like you say, like in the Screaming Staircase, she's a little bit hesitant in her abilities. But, one of the first things that we see her do, well, chronologically, okay, one of the first things that we see her do is leave to London. And that is an incredibly reckless act. She's from this teeny tiny little village way up north. She's never been, where did you say? Like, she's never really been further than Newcastle. She's been about 30 miles away from her home, if that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then she just gets up one morning, gets on a train, goes out to London with nothing lined up.
And I mean, at that point in time, she's probably 14 years old. Like, she is a child still in many ways.
Mm-hmm. And she just goes for it. And I think that's really interesting. And especially kind of when we were talking about her confidence and stuff, because she is in the Screaming Staircase, especially. She's a little bit unsure of her own abilities, isn't she? Like, reading it back after you've read the whole series, when you read it back and you look at like the Hope House, okay, you've got her recklessness. She says, okay, we have to stay. That's her being reckless again. Though, Lockwood shouldn't have left the decision to his junior associate.
And he should have brought the chains.
Yeah, he should have brought the chains. I mean, Lucy should have checked the kit bags as well. But
It just shows that they're kids, that they're amateurish.
and they're messing around. And on that, like the flare that she throws,
Yeah.
it's to save Lockwood. But he's like a foot away. Okay, she doesn't have a sword. His sword is stuck, but she's got all the salt bombs at her waist.
Mm.
There's the iron all over the floor. She's got a silver net in her hand. Why did she throw a freaking flare?
The plot requires it.
Panic.
I think it's more panic. Because,
Yeah.
in the Creeping Shadow, we then see one of the kids on the team she's with when they're going after Emma Martian, the ghost that you can only see in mirrors.
Mm.
Oh, yeah. He throws it at her and she gets all like judgy about him. Like, yeah, I got it. It's fine.
Yeah.
We didn't need the flare over my head. Thank you.
She's actually quite nice to him about it.
That's
I
so
reread
funny.
that,
She's
but
nice to him for Lucy. She's
Yeah.
nice to him for Lucy.
but she's like she's nice to his face, but her narration is just eviscerating him for it. Which is
I do think her narration, and this is maybe more Doylist than Watsonian, but I think it lets us see these children doing things that normally we would be horrified by children
Mhm.
facing death every night, going up against these ghosts. But it's really fun when it's through her eyes because she sees it as a big adventure. She doesn't see how messed up this is. She doesn't see how dangerous it is most of the time, or she doesn't acknowledge it. So I actually think that's a really good choice.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like it's hard to oh God, we're getting into narrative structures here again, but it is
it's Lucy,
like
she's the narrator. That's
it's very hard, but like on the one hand, this is at least nominally a series for kids. So, making it all, oh, children are the victim, oh, everything's terrible. It's not really what kids want to read, I think. I think that's something more that adults like reading about. Whereas kids want to be the ones out there with the sword and they want a believable reason, for
Yeah.
them to be out there without adult supervision and with a sword and a house and a cool maybe sort of boyfriend / boss. That's
Actually,
what
my
children
kid
want.
has sort of like lost interest by the Creeping Shadow. She loved the first 3 books, and then the last 2 books when the boyfriend / boss thing kind of happened.
She's a bit
She's
young
like,
for that
nah.
yet.
Yeah, she's a bit young.
Yeah, fair enough. Teenage me would have been all over that. But anyway. But yeah, it is.
As opposed to adult you, who is very blasé
Oh
about it.
yeah, I'm so normal about it. I'm doing a whole podcast about how normal I am.
I think that makes 4 of us,
Yeah, it's true.
unfortunately. So
Don't throw rocks. You're in a glass house right now. But anyway, it is like the kind of the darkness in the narrative. I like that Lucy doesn't acknowledge it. And also, I mean, I found Stroud in his own interviews when like people try and go, oh, but isn't it super dark that Lockwood sees death everywhere? Like, he sees like death glows all the time. Isn't that super dark? He's kind of like, no, he's normal about it. He turns it on and off. It's fine.
I mean, they're all very practical about it, aren't they?
Exactly. There's a little
Yes.
bit of keep calm and carry on and just, get
It's
on
the
with it.
reality
Get
they're
over
living
it.
in. What are
Yeah.
you gonna do? You're gonna see death glows as you walk down the street. That's just what's gonna happen. If you're gonna freak out over every single one of them, you're never gonna walk down the bloody street.
But
Exactly.
how much of that do you think is her trying to convince us that she's tough and unafraid? And how much of it is real? I think it's a combination of both, honestly. Especially by the time she must be writing the books, she has become braver and more confident.
Mm.
But I feel like
Mm,
she's sometimes trying to project a level of confidence that she doesn't necessarily feel in those moments. I think it's
maybe.
actually an interesting contrast between the book Lucy and show Lucy, because show Lucy always looks like she's fighting through the terror. But book Lucy would have us believe that this is just Tuesday. And rarely does she ever encounter anything that's truly horrifying to her or that she admits is truly horrifying to her.
But Book Lucy's been doing
Um,
it for a lot longer.
it's true.
Show Lucy's only been doing it for 3 years. Book Lucy's been doing it for 6 by the time we meet her.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
No,
show,
you're right. I'm inclined to think book Lucy is actually pretty tough. Like she is kind of a badass.
yeah.
Hmm.
Especially, I mean, by the end of the series, maybe not so much in the Screaming Staircase, but I think by the end of the series, like the Empty Grave Lucy is a total badass. I think we can
Oh
all
yeah.
agree on
With the
that.
ghost print on her jacket, like it's great.
Even to some degree, like, okay, in the Screaming Staircase, going back again to the confidence thing, like I was well impressed with her interview.
Mm.
I was, because the toothbrush cup test, that was actually a brilliant test, because she sits there and she holds it, and if she didn't have confidence in her abilities and in her skills and in her talent as a listener, then she would have, panicked. But she didn't. She sat there and then she said, "No, I need more time. No, nothing. Sorry, nothing."
I suppose it's being able to translate that, which is, I mean, okay, it's a high stakes situation in that, her livelihood is at stake, her job, but it's not a life or death moment. And where she really struggles with her confidence is in those life or death moments, in
Mm.
in Hope House, in Coombe Carey, like, am I doing the right thing in this life or death moment? Whereas, you can see at this small scale, she has the right instincts. It's just having the confidence to apply them when the stakes are really high, I think.
I think part of it also is kind of, she only seems to have that trouble when she's working with other people.
True.
It's like making the decisions for both of us. That's kind of when she kind of falters and wants to hide behind someone to do it. And that's probably looping back around to Jacobs and her sisters and all of that nonsense.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so now we've talked a bit about how Lucy is on the inside. Let's move on to talking about how Lucy sees the world around her. One of the things that I in particular notice when I read her narrative, especially in The Whispering Skull, is that she finds a lot of meaning in being an agent, but it also kind of seems to make her feel like she's better than other people who aren't agents. She talks about, she talks about noble agents and wicked relic men and how agents help people.
And useless DPRAC agents. I really
Exactly.
feel like all adults are useless. I think the first time she introduces Quill Kipps is like, oh, he's 20, his talent is faded. He's completely useless. Why is he even here?
Yeah.
Right.
Everyone that has no talent is just useless in her world. And I see that, okay, for her job, yeah, they're useless, but somebody's still got to sell you donuts, girl.
Yeah.
They're not.
Well, and I
But I
mean,
do love that she's portraying herself and Lockwood and Co. and like they're the superheroes. Everyone else, worse than useless. We have to save them or they're actively getting in our way.
and it makes sense that she feels this way somewhat because she is a child still who has only, for the past 6 years, this has been her life. And this in her world, only children can do the work that she does. So to an extent, it makes sense that she thinks adults are so useless because she's had such a limited life experience at this point.
Well, and the adults in her life have been pretty useless, right? Jacobs trained her, but as time went on, she became more competent and saw his flaws more and more. And also, he lost his nerve, as she says.
Mm.
But her mother's barely there for her. Her father isn't there for her. No adults in her life have ever taken care of her or, from her point of view, ever done a damn thing for her.
I mean, yeah, but you can find the most spoilt 14-year-old on the planet. They'll still tell you that no adults are doing a damn thing for her, won't they?
Maybe it's just universally a 14-year-old trait.
Well, that's one of the best things about Lucy is that even though she is, she's very adult-like in many ways, like she's out there earning money and like living on her own and doing all these things, but she's still such a teenager. And I think that really comes through also, the more you go through the series and as she learns to grapple with relationships and as we see how she interacts with the different people that she cares about, I think it becomes very clear that she is a teenager in many ways.
Yeah, I think like one of her most teenage characteristics is how all or nothing she is. You know, she likes very few people, and the ones she that she does like, she's absolutely ride or die for. She's a little bit obsessive almost, she kind of, for the first three books, certainly, like her feelings towards Lockwood are kind of more obsession, infatuation, maybe than like genuine affection. Although that's there too. It takes a while to grow. So it's a little bit narrow, it's a little bit obsessive. And when she doesn't like you, she really doesn't like you. You're like there's that really memorable description of Quill Kipps as like being a plague rat licking a bowl of caviar or something like that.
It's so good.
Cat
Yeah,
Godwin
no,
planting beans with her chin.
Oh yeah, no, she's so unbelievably catty and mean in her like descriptions. It's so funny. I absolutely love it. But it's not a very nice way like to view the world. So it is nice to see that as she goes through the series, she remains very passionate, but her tunnel vision like expands a bit. She takes an interest in the world beyond her circle a bit more. So
Well, for that matter, aside from Lockwood, she hates everyone else in her circle on first meeting.
yeah,
Holly, George,
it's true.
Quips, Kipps, Skull.
Quips. I do that too. I call him Kill Quips.
No.
It's terrible. Why did Stroud pick those two like consonants to go
Those
together?
sounds together.
I know.
It does sound lovely, but it is very hard to say.
It is very hard to say. It's just another feature of Quill Kipps. Kill Kipps.
Yeah, we will have a future episode talking about Quill. Don't worry, everyone.
But with her like immediate like for
All quips.
Lockwood, with her immediate like for Lockwood,
Mm.
I find it really interesting kind of on the reread because your initial kind of impression is that oh she's got a crush on him but then I wonder if that's because I watched the show first.
Mhm.
And from the show it's obvious there's a lot of spark there. But when you kind of reread it, she's talking about oh she's pleased to be walking into the darkness with him at her back. Or how how he takes the lead on cases, how he's always there for the team, how he's willing to go in first. She's always talking about things like that, which I think she's kind of comparing him to Jacobs as a supervisor in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, even though he's only a year her senior, he is in a position of power, and he's probably the first person in her life in a position of power who's been really encouraging, who's really valued her as a person, but also for her talents, which she can't really tell the difference between the two anymore. So that works out fine for her. And it is a lot of admiration for his abilities, both as a leader and as an agent.
Mm.
Yeah, I think
Does she have a crush on him at that point? I do think she does.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a little bit too much smiles brightening up rooms for it to not be like, there's a definite spark from the get-go. I think it's also, she has this is another kind of feature of her like obsessive nature is that she has this craving for connection, I think. Like you see that I mentioned earlier, she wants to belong to a group. She really, really wants to be close to someone. And I think it's very interesting how she attributes that to ghosts, like, particularly in The Hollow Boy, she's saying, oh, but they want to connect with people. They want to reach out. It's the natural state. I think that's her state. She's the one who's constant. She's actually vulnerable to ghosts because she's so open, so yearning for a connection.
I
While
think that's a natural human state.
well, yes,
And
it's true.
I think this is skipping way ahead. But Skull, too, learns that lesson that he needs connection. He needs connection to other humans, and that it, in the end, makes him stronger than Ezekiel, as Stroud has said. So
Yeah,
I think that is a theme throughout the books. We're stronger together. We are
definitely.
stronger with human connection. We need human connection, living or dead.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I suppose that you kind of have this central conflict between Lockwood and Lucy, which is him kind of trying to be an island like by himself and her being like, no, let me in there. Open that door.
Mm.
Um, But
Like,
I
open
think
it or I will knock it down. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. These steel caps are coming through your walls, mate. You don't have a chance. Anyway, save that
I
for the
find
Lockwood
that
episode.
really interesting how she's like that with Lockwood. Um, just because, like, again, looking at it kind of as a whole, she's sort of not like that with her family. When she talks about her family, it's like, I mean, at the beginning, she says that she's always nocturnal, so she never sees them basically. They're living in the same house. She's living with her sister, she's living with her mum, but she never sees them because she's doing nocturnal hours. And as somebody married to somebody who works a night shift, you absolutely can see them if you want to. Um, and then later on in the series, she also says, you know, the only person who writes to her anymore is Mary, but she never calls them.
Yeah.
No, she's not doing a lot of reaching out, even though she has this great desire for connection at that point, especially in the early parts of the series. She's not very good at reaching out. But I think that somewhat speaks to a little bit to her insecurity and her own jealousy. Like she's a little bit afraid to reach out because she's afraid she'll be rejected.
Yeah. And that kind of comes from being left behind, I think. I mean, comes from being left behind, with by the friends who died at the mill. I mean, it's not rational, but I think that is kind of how you think. Um, but it also comes from probably a little bit that treatment she got from her mother, like, the father who was absent and then literally absent, dead, and then the mother who was absent, and in terms of, like, I think she says that she just didn't have any affection left after 7 children,
And
that
she's
so
working
it's
6 days a week at 2 jobs as well, isn't she?
exactly like this woman, like, I feel she's not a popular character in the fandom, but I do feel a bit of sympathy for her because she's someone that circumstance has just kind of wrung out like a damp rag. So you can see why Lucy is kind of set up to expect rejection as the default and why she would project that onto everyone she meets by rejecting them first. Um, Whereas Lockwood, she is very much on the defensive with him. Um, Even in the interview, she's very much on the defensive. Like, oh, I can't remember what the line in the book is, but
Oh, no, that's right. Like, I can see where the door is. Like,
yeah,
she immediately thinks that they're not going to hire her. She's already accepted it and she's on her way out.
And that's really interesting to me because that comes straight after her turning to Lockwood and saying, did anybody else get this right? Like, she already knows she got it right.
yeah,
Yeah, she knows she's good. She just doesn't trust it.
yeah.
Yeah, or she just doesn't trust him to accept it, maybe.
I think a really
Yeah, that's probably
salient
accurate.
point is that she, like all the kind of the crushy stuff. I think, I mean, maybe it starts during the interview, but where it really starts is during that little tete-a-tete they have on her first night there when he reveals that he knows about her past. He knows that she's not what she says she is, and he says it doesn't matter. You can have a chance anyway. And I think that's where she really warms up to him. Um,
Mm.
because she was in a position where she was expecting rejection and she got acceptance instead. So for Lucy, that's huge, and we've now deviated massively into Carlyle territory. So sorry, but it is.
But this is getting back to, we were saying that it's hard to talk about Lucy's arc without Lockwood.
Mm,
And because that's the first time she's been accepted in a long time, and he continues to accept her. And over time, she learns to accept others as well.
yeah, no, I think she definitely
And I
should.
think that's where it starts.
Yeah, it's funny. I never actually made that connection. That's why it's so exciting to have these conversations. Um, but yeah, no, she has a big arc there, which is great. She becomes more accepting of people. She sees value in people that don't follow her exact path in life. Flo, Quill, even Barnes starts to get a more positive portrayal in the end. And I think that's so important because, again, probably straying into other topics, but if there's one thing I don't like about kids' literature, it's kind of the adults are useless thing because, it gives you have a sell-by date. It's all very well to say, oh, we're empowering the kids and, they don't need the adults, but it's like you're going to become one. And if you're useless and dried up and nothing by the age of 20, then then it's kind of suicidal, it's self-destructive. So that's why I love that Quill in particular gets a redemption arc,
Redemption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So but she learns empathy for people, particularly during that, like, going off alone by herself in the Hollow Boy and kind of reaching rock bottom. I think she comes back with a much more compassionate and accepting attitude to people. So that she breaks out of herself a bit, which is, again, something that all teenagers have to learn. And actually, there's a good few adults I know who could do with that journey. It's hard to really be yeah, what's the word? Aware. Like she gains a bit more awareness of her own strengths and weaknesses. And then, she that translates into compassion for others.
And it builds up her self-worth, which is definitely at rock bottom in The Hollow Boy.
Mm. Oh, the Hollow Boy is so sad. I love it.
So for Lucy in Hollow Boy, that's really the book where we see her struggle a lot with insecurity and understanding her self-worth. And we see it particularly come through not just in her talent, but also in her physical appearance and how she talks about herself. So there's a quote early on in the series where we talks about how her mother told Lucy that prettiness isn't her profession. And it seems like Lucy really takes that to heart, and it makes her feel really uncomfortable in her own skin. And then she's threatened by other girls that are more traditionally feminine. So the most obvious example of that is Holly, but we also see that related to Kat, Goodwin, and then we see how that can turn into jealousy at certain points, as discussed about how Lucy interacts with other people and how she can be a little possessive. But
To kind of like
this is
butt in there, I kind of think Holly might remind her of her sisters a bit.
That's
Do
interesting.
this,
Like,
do that, fold your laundry, do that,
There's so
definitely
many
the
ways
bossiness
that
part of it.
Holly pushes her buttons. Like it's like every possible button that you could push, Holly pushes them. So the fact that she actually ends up accepting Holly, like, that's character growth, Lucy. I'm so proud of you.
No, it really is. I mean, she has such a good arc when it comes to accepting other people, but also when it comes to accepting herself. And part of that is learning to be a little bit more accepting of her own appearance and her own attractiveness by the end of the series. Like, there's a great quote as she is taking the elevator up at the very end of The Empty Grave to confront Marissa, where she looks in the mirror, and this is what she says about herself. I look down at my frost-burned boots, my skirt and torn leggings, my old jacket with a ghost handprint on the side. I checked in the mirror again, smoothing down my hair a little. It was nice to look at myself after everything. Nice to be reminded who I was. Lucy Carlyle. And I just,
Wow, that's amazing. I've never picked up before that bit and how much growth that is for her. That's incredible.
it is an incredible amount of growth.
it is the one and only time in the books when she describes herself in the mirror and doesn't say, I look like an agent.
Yeah.
The
She looks
one
like
and only.
herself. She looks like herself. And she's still an agent. Like, she has that ghost handprint on the side of her jacket, which is such a fantastic detail. But, she's been through so much, and she's grown a new sense of confidence in herself and who she is. And while
Really
being an agent
comfortable
is
in
part
her
of,
own skin.
yeah, it's really beautiful to see.
I do kind of wonder though, because the fandom, if anybody reads any type of fic, you all know that post-canon fics almost always have like Lockwood breaking down when he loses his talent. But I mean, throughout the entire series, right up until that moment in the elevator, can't believe I just said elevator, this is your fault. Right up until that moment in the lift, okay?
Sorry, the Americans are coming
Yeah.
out.
Well, Lucy just constantly talks about how she's an agent, and that's like the only thing she really talks about herself. The only thing she says to describe herself, she's an agent. Like Lockwood, you can kind of see from him, okay, he's like he's a son, a brother, a friend. He's a businessman, he's a swordsman, he's kind of a teacher mentor, he's a helper. And Lucy, she follows along with a lot of that, but she only ever talks about herself as an agent. She wears agent's clothes. She's dressed like an agent. She's doing this. It's all about her talent. So I sort of think that, like, if anybody's gonna have a breakdown post-canon when they lose their talent, it's gonna be Lucy.
I actually think that's really interesting because we were just talking about her artistry, and there was some question as to whether that was really canon or if it was just something that the fans had really picked up on, and it's not in the show at all. And it is in there. It is a thread through the books that she has sketchbooks, she's the best artist of the group, but she places no value on her artistic ability. She only places value on her abilities as an agent. And so we're left wondering, does she have artistic ability? She clearly has put not a lot of effort into developing those skills because all of her efforts have gone into making herself an agent. And as somebody who spent their entire education aiming for one thing and then getting there and realizing it was something I didn't want, having a breakdown, and then having to choose a new career. I definitely think that that's something Lucy would go through post-canon, whether she loses her talent or not, because I know that is something that is debated to some extent, that she might not lose her talent.
Mm.
It's so strong, and she's been to the other side twice. She's marked by death. She might never lose it,
Mm.
but she still may get to a point where she realizes that this is not all there is, and this is not all of who she is. And as other people in her life move on from being agents and find fulfillment in other ways, I think that she would as well.
I do
Mm.
like that Stroud hasn't like actually detailed exactly how that journey would go for her because that's, you know, the books take her up as far as like 16 or 17 and she's gotten to the point where she doesn't actively want to die anymore. Even if it's like, you know, in the books I think her lack of self-worth or like her lack of kind of maybe passive suicidal ideation
I
is
mean, a lot of it, I think she's kind of white knuckling through it just through sheer spite, isn't she? Like,
yeah,
you're not gonna kill
Oh,
me.
yes.
yeah.
Right.
Um but I think, you know, she's started to want to be in the world and to want to have a future. I think like that's the little opening we get at the end of the series. So that whole arc of like, okay, God, who am I outside of this like this one thing that I have been tunnel visioning on my whole life? That's another 5 books, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that Stroud didn't really go into it too heavily because it would have it would have been impossible to fit it into the space that he had. I think, unless he wants to write another 5 books, which please go ahead, Mr. Stroud. I would love that.
But like we've got a whole 5 books, all of them are narrated by Lucy. And when somebody says, "What's Lucy's arc through the books?" It's like, you kind of blank a little bit because it's very hard to pin it down. You've got, like you said, she goes from kind of passively suicidal to, okay, she wants to live, and she goes from being a complete hater to being a lot more accepting and compassionate. But it's hard. It almost feels like she kind of goes to a place where she can start her arc in a way.
Yeah.
I actually think all of that is rooted in a journey towards self-acceptance, which is a big thing that teenagers struggle with,
Mm.
especially like middle schoolers, which I don't know what you call those in the UK, but middle schoolers in
Brats.
particular are having a really hard time finding their personalities and deciding who are they as a person. Teenagers get really into the importance of authenticity and are you being your authentic self? And that person's such a faker and that kind of thing. So I think that journey towards self-acceptance is something that everyone goes through. It's very relatable. Um, to realizing that she is an agent, she is strong, she is capable, she is confident, that she has people who have her back and people that she cares about and that she wants to save and do right by. And these are all things that she's lacking at the beginning. And I think becoming more confident in her own skin allows her to be more accepting of other people and to accept these people into her life and to be a part of theirs as well.
And we talked earlier about how one of the themes of this series is really about the importance of relationships, the importance of connection. And then that's also so critical to Lucy's arc that she goes from really kind of being on her own in the world in many ways to having this like, close-knit community of the agency and everyone that's part of it around her. And she's never had that before in her life. That's incredibly important to her development over the series.
And with that, that's all we've got time for tonight. I hope that's given everybody a clearer idea of who Lucy Carlyle is, because honestly, I'm coming away from this thinking, wow, she's extremely complex, and there's actually a lot more to talk about as far as Lucy goes. But we're gonna have to leave that for another episode.
I mean, we'll come back to the narrative style and what that tells us about her, and we'll come back to her and Lockwood's relationship, right?
Hmm.
And get into more detail, I think, in places like the Hollow Boy and the Creeping Shadow and her leaving and coming back. I definitely want to talk about the ways that she leaves things over the course of the series. There's like 2 big ones, but there's a few others that are more subtle.
Yeah, I definitely
I just
want to
want
hear
to say
about
I
that.
love her contradictions. I think she's funny, she's fearless. She's also kind of petty and jealous and not willing to leave well enough alone. And she's highly empathetic, but also not great at seeing things from anyone else's point of view, unless you're a ghost.
Mm.
So I
Unless you're
love Lucy
Skull.
Carlyle. I would definitely read another 5 books from her point of view.
Absolutely.
Well, Well, that's all we have for tonight. So thank you all so much for listening. If you would like, you can find us on the internet. We are at hauntingthenarrative.wixsite.com/podcast. We're also on X at HTN Podcast, and we're on Tumblr at Haunting the Narrative Pod. And finally, you can, and please do email us at hauntingthenarrativepod@gmail.com. If you have any feedback, comments, questions, we would love to hear from you and to talk Lockwood & Co.